Hello and welcome. This is the Well-Paid Geek from wellpaidgeek.com. Today you'll learn all about the way that ES6 enhances the creation of object literals. ES6 provides us with some syntax that makes working with object literals easier. This includes dynamic property names right within object literal syntax. Also, a new shorthand for defining object literal property names and values all in one, and finally object spread. This is a nice way of merging objects and their properties easily. Okay, so first off we're going to look at dynamic property names. In the past, property names in object literals could not be dynamic, they had to be static. This was a bit of a pain, but ES6 gives us a new syntax which allows for object literals to have dynamic property names. I'll show you exactly what I mean with some code. Here we've got a very simple function, createPerson. It takes an ID, a first name and a last name, and creates a person object based off these values. Down here we call it with an ID of 2, first name of Dave, last name of Smith. And what we want the output to be, we see that here, we want first name underscore, then the value of the ID, followed by the value of the first name. Then we want last name underscore, value of the ID, followed by the value of the last name. So how we have to achieve this in JavaScript currently is, firstly, we create a person object. Then we use the square bracket syntax to create the property names and assign them to values, and finally return the person object. The way we'd really like to do it is how I've done it within new createPerson, where we just return a simple object literal. It seems a lot simpler to do this, and also it just reads better. When you've got an object literal, you can tell what you're trying to achieve. You've just got property name, property value, property name, property value. It reads a lot better. Trouble is, this that I've done here, this isn't actually valid JavaScript. You can't have this dynamic property name here, and the reason it's dynamic is because we've got a string and then we concatenate it with the ID variable, so it's dynamic rather than static. You can't have an expression like this within a property name. That will error. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this using the new ES6 enhanced object literals dynamic property names. It's really simple. You just wrap the dynamic property names in square brackets, and that's the only change you have to make. Now if we come down here, if we run new createPerson, it should give us output matching this. Yeah, that's exactly what we wanted. Just to go off on a little bit of a tangent, if you've watched some of my previous videos, you will have seen a couple of other ES6 features that will make this new createPerson function just even more concise. So first we'll turn everything, or turn createNewPerson rather, into a fat arrow function. That's done like that. Because it's a fat arrow function, we can actually just return the literal without a return statement. So we can just do that, and then we can go one step further and use template strings here. Okay, and if we rerun this, we should get the same result. Yeah. So I just wanted to show you that, because it's something that's important to note, is that ES6 features, or the new syntaxes, on their own, they don't seem like they make much of an impact, but then when you layer them on top of each other and use multiple ES6 features, say within one piece of code like this, their usefulness does compound to make the code a lot more concise, a lot more readable, and a lot nicer to work with. Next up, we have property names and values all in one. This feature is essentially just a nice little time-saving shorthand we can use when we have a variable containing a value we wish to be part of an object literal, such that the variable name is identical to the property name to which we wish to assign the value. This is one of those things that when I explain it verbally, it sounds a bit confusing and you probably don't know what I mean at all. However, when we look at some code, it's really simple and really obvious. So let's do that. So again, we have another createPerson function because obviously I'm just not very original. It takes an ID, a first name and last name, and then simply just outputs an object literal with the ID, the first name and the last name, with all the property names exactly matching these variable names here. So we'll run that. We get first name Dave, ID 2, last name Smith. Okay, so if you look at this, it's just a bit tedious to have to essentially repeat yourself multiple times because the property names, the property keys are identical to the variable names that we want the value of the property to be. So we keep having to repeat ID, ID, first name, last name, last name. It's a bit tedious. With ES6, we can just literally get rid of the variables from here and just have the property names since they match variables in our current scope. So if we clear that and run, we get exactly the same result. You'll run into this situation a lot. Because obviously you give your variables names that sort of describe the values they hold, and you do exactly the same thing with property names in objects. They describe the values they hold. Therefore, it's going to be really common that you're in a situation where you're creating great big object literals and you've got a load of variables in the local scope and their names are identical to the property names of the literal you're creating. So it's a very small thing, but it comes up very regularly and will save you a lot of typing and potentially getting repetitive strain injury in the future. Last but not least, we come on to object spread. This just allows us to explode property values into a new object when creating an object literal. The syntax can also be used to merge objects, and it's often used in situations where in the past object.assign would have been used. Let's see it in action. Here we've got a simple function called createProfile. It takes an ID that's a number, then person, location and job, all of which are objects. It then merges the ID value and all of these three objects, all of their properties, into one big object and returns that object. It achieves this by calling the object_assign function, which does all the merging for us. Down here, you can see I call it with the above objects and an ID of 99. And we run that, and you can see it just explodes out all the property values from the objects passed, adds the ID, and then we get our final big object, our profile. Okay, so how to do this using object spread. So we can get rid of the object_assign, and we can just do an object literal. Okay, so firstly we want our ID. So we just put, as we saw in one of the previous slides, since the variable name matches the property name we want, we just put ID. We don't need the colon and then to repeat ourselves by putting ID again. We can't do that with person, location and job because these are all objects. So if I was to return this, you'll see what I get. We get a sort of parent object with the ID and then a load of sub objects with the variable names being the property names. That's not what we want. So to solve this, we use object spread. It's just a triple dot in front of each object you want to merge in or explode the properties into the main object, like this. If you've watched some of my previous videos, you will have seen this triple dot operator before used for different things in different contexts. For example, if it's used in the arguments of a function, it's the function arguments rest operator. It's also an array spread operator. In this context, though, it's something different. It's the object spread operator. So yeah, this operator, it's contextual. What it does, the context you use it in this case within an object literal, defines how it works. So if we run this again, clear it first rather, run it again. Okay, we'll see now we've got the one big object which we wanted. Anyone with a keen eye may have noticed a slight problem here. The ID is 101, whereas if we see down here the call to the function, we pass in 99 as the ID. Why has this happened? Well, what will happen when you use object spread is that newer property values will overwrite previous property values. So if we take a look at, here it is, person has an ID value of 101, and since person comes in the list after ID, our ID value we're passing into the function is getting overwritten. There's a really simple solution to this. We simply put ID last, and then it'll take priority over everything else. And if we clear and rerun, we now have an ID of 99. Thanks for watching. Please like the video, as it makes me very, very happy. Also, subscribe to see more videos like this. I mentioned a lot of previous videos in this one. If you didn't recognize any of the syntaxes, go and watch those. They are covered. If your thirst for knowledge, however, still persists after doing all these things, feel free to visit my blog. It's at wellpaidgeek.com, and there's a load of JavaScript articles on there as well.